Celina, why don't I turn it over to you to get started?
Sure. Yeah. Welcome, Chelsea. I'm so excited you're here because when we talk about SQL 101, it is dedicated to audiences like you and folks like Amy who are talking about brushing up old skill sets. And so this is built to be non-intimidating, super friendly. How can we get you into data? Because there are tons of courses out there. And sometimes it just takes a different approach of explaining it to get it. So I'll get us started and I will start presenting. And of course, for everybody else, always raise your hand, chime in if you have questions. Sometimes when you know a topic very well, like culinary knife designer, skill sets, the obvious may not seem like something you mention, and so you'll forget to mention it. And if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. And you can always reach out to me, Stephen, Chloe, if you have additional questions. But I wanted to start with that. And so let me go ahead and share my screen.
While you're sharing the screen, Celina, I just want to take a quick second to give you a bit of an introduction and let the group know that Celina is an incredibly accomplished data leader. She was running the team at Data Culture for a number of months, like over a year, right, Celina?
Oh, yes, a year and a half.
Year and a half, right? And she just has a lot of great experience working with data tools and with real human beings who use data every day, and she's great at bridging the two together. So I'm thrilled you're here joining us for this, and I'm so ready to find out what I didn't know about SQL before today. So go ahead, Celina.
You can also feel free to chime in. So let's get started. I will share my window. You might see yourselves. Let me go ahead and go in present mode. Let me put that on full screen for all of you because I've been on plenty of presentations where I can't see anything. And please let me know if you have any questions or speak up, because I think in full presenter mode, I actually can't see your beautiful names and faces. So definitely raise your hand, or Stephen or Chloe, if someone has a question, please read it out loud or stop me. But welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you're joining the first session of this wonderful series of bootcamp topics that Stephen, Chloe, and the team at Database Tycoon have put together for all of you, all for free, by the way. Today we're going over SQL 101, as we were starting to allude to. And oftentimes, when people think about SQL or other programming languages, it's really, how do you speak data's language, right? Because you have to be able to speak to your database to retrieve what you need. And SQL is by far the most popular programming language to learn. I remember, I think even to this day, people still debate, like, what language should I start with if I'm just getting started? Is it Python? Is it R? And you'll be overwhelmed with all this information, but you'll often find that people will tell you start with SQL, because it is very much the one that you will need. And even if you move into Python eventually, SQL is a great basis for you to get started or have that fundamental. I also put a slide in here for who this training is for. We talked about, aspiring data analysts, for non-technical professionals. You could be coming from any area of practice, but you just want to learn more about data. And data is a skill set that you've probably seen. Now it's in the news because we can't stop hearing about AI. But it's something that you can carry with you across many industries, if not soon to be all industries. And, last but not least, you're a forever student. This might be boring to you, but you might also be someone who identifies as someone who is a student forever. And that's how I see myself. You might think that I might think I know something, but every time I go back to the basics, I pick up something new, or I find a new way to explain a concept that just helps someone else understand it better. In fact, even myself. So if that's you, welcome. Stephen gave me a very kind introduction, and I thought I included a slide here for myself because I'll be talking, with you, at you for some time. So it would be nice to know who I am. As Stephen alluded to, my name is Celina Wong. I've had 16 years of experience across data and finance. I actually started in finance and pivoted to data, and I learned SQL accidentally. So I was not as smart as all of you. At the time, I was a financial analyst. I was using drag and drop features for my reporting purposes. And one day the classic migration happened and there was no UI to drag and drop anymore. And the team developing the new system and working on the migration told me, just go learn SQL. And I looked around and said, what's SQL? I couldn't even say it correctly because I had no idea what it was. But I was a young 20-something-year-old with a lot of student debt, and I didn't want to get fired for not being able to produce the report I needed. So I persevered and Googled a lot and started to learn what is SQL. And I found a way to reproduce the report and continue on. What I didn't realize was I set myself down a new path in my career. And so moral of that story is persevere, continue learning, be that forever student, and you never know what great career path you find yourself in. And fast forward, I've been head of data 3 times with 2 successful startup exits. So that's wonderful. One of the last startup exits I was a part of, we sold the company to a Fortune 50 company, and they were applauding us for the data strategy and our tech stack for what we had built with our customer data. And they were very impressed because this global retail company sells to third parties. And so as you can imagine with third parties, they're not really working with a lot of customer level data, and they wanted that skill set and they wanted that technology across their brands. And last but not least, Stephen alluded to this, I have been a one-time CEO of a data consultancy, taking everything I've learned and helping clients reach that level of success that I just mentioned. And so as you can see, my career has spanned from Fortune 50 companies that if I say the name, you'll recognize the brand, all the way to being employee 28 at a startup, all the way to leading a data consultancy startup. And the industries have ranged from D2C retail to financial services. And the data is very different, although you run across some of the same messy data over and over again. So that's me. So before we even get into what is SQL, I think it's important to touch upon why learn SQL. It seems like a obvious, duh, I just want data skills. But today we're bombarded with news around, AI can do everything for you. AI is going to replace you. So why learn SQL, especially when you have AI to do it, right? My opinion, and I would say a lot of folks out there who know SQL, have been in the data industry for a long time, would say or should say, it's even more important now than ever to understand what your query is doing, what the data you're pulling is saying. What does it even mean? Is this even important for the question that you're trying to answer? Because AI can spit out code for you, but if you don't know what it's pulling, then what is it worth, right? How are you going to rewrite the code for what you want? How are you going to review that it's correct? What if you're trying to answer a simple question of how many, if you're working for a company that has food as ingredients and you want to count a number of carrots in your inventory, how do you know the count's accurate, right? And the internet nowadays, you'll find terms like vibe coding everywhere. LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, wherever you go, you just hear vibe coding. But I would say that without context and the ability to review, so the ability to understand SQL, if you don't have any of that, then it's just trash. I mean, at that point, you're just throwing a bunch of AI slop, right? Which is like another terminology out there, which essentially means you're putting out a lot of garbage. Because what you're putting out there isn't of quality. We don't know what it means. You don't know what it means. So I've talked extensively of why, but I hope you understand why learning it now is more important than ever, because I had someone had come to me and said, is it even important to learn SQL now? You know, should I still be a CS major, a computer science major? AI could replace us. And I said, actually, if it's of interest to you, you should go in and learn the fundamentals and understand why and what the code even does, because you're going to have so much AI written code that's already out there that they need people who actually understand what it's doing, how to fix it, and how to review it. So with that, let's talk about what is SQL. The SQL stands for Structured Query Language. And so this is the generic definition that you'll find anywhere. You don't have to listen to me. You can go Google it, and you'll find that it's around how do you essentially retrieve data, manipulate data, and manage your data. So how do I actually go to this data set, pull out the data I need, or change the data, because we all know that data can be messy. So how do I clean up that data with SQL? And it's a generic definition and it's fine, but it doesn't help you really grasp at what it means. And so thought of another way to explain it to you all. And I'm so glad Chelsea's here, because it actually talks about, it's not about culinary knives, but I'm like, what's universal? You can imagine that on the left-hand side, you have a bunch of forks, spoons, and knives in your kitchen drawer, and they're not organized. This was probably us in, in college, or the first time you're living on your own, and, things are disorganized and you're just throwing things in a pile. And you can imagine it's really hard to find the fork you need, or a knife and a spoon in one go when it's just thrown in a pile, right? So it's very unstructured. And on the right-hand side, you could see that they are organized, and you even visually quickly feel better, but can quickly go and say, let me go pick up that spoon, right? You could see it, you can identify it, and it's organized and structured. So I'm using this analogy because when we think about the word structured query language, SQL is used for when data is structured. And so a piece of data is like that piece of spoon that you're staring at in front of you, right? In this organized fashion, we're using this querying language to go and pull data from a structured data set, like this structured drawer. And so hopefully that helps you at least have some sort of like analogy to our everyday lives that everyone can relate to understand when someone says structured data, or, I'm using this query language to pull from structured data. What does that even mean, structured versus unstructured? Maybe this image will pop into your head and start to click that structure versus unstructured is just a bunch of forks and knives that are better organized. And those can be data points. And so the other natural question that you should be asking, and if not, as you're learning SQL, this is what you ask is, great, I'm learning how to pull from structured, data, and I'm using this thing called SQL, but where is this data, right? Like, why am I even writing SQL? You're querying from databases and tables is where you're pulling from. And so sometimes when you're learning data, or sometimes even when you're working in data, you feel like, wait, are we talking about a database? Are we talking about a table? What does it even mean? A table is within a database. So in the kitchen analogy that I was just telling you about, the database is as if you walked into your kitchen and you've got cabinets and drawers, and those are your folders, if you will, right? Because each one of them contain pieces of kitchen utensils, and really it translates to a piece of data that you're looking for. So the database is this whole kitchen that you're looking at, and a table is that utensil drawer. And within that utensil drawer, you're going to have to go and find the spoon. And so this is the generic slide, of what you define, or how do you define databases and tables. And here I'm giving you a little bit more of an example of a database contains tables, so like folders, like that kitchen drawer I told you about. And in the work setting, in real life work setting and data sets that you look at, an example of tables is customers, products, and orders, right? So if you went and bought this kitchen set today, the company selling it to you has tables about you as a customer and many other customers, the products they're selling, so forks, knives, and spoons, and a record of the order. So the order of you ordering that kitchen set. And within those tables are contain rows and columns, so records and fields, right? And an example of a column in a customer table is your unique customer ID, your name, your customer email. And within those rows, so you can think of those columns, fields as the vertical part of the data table. The rows are what's going horizontal. So the customer ID is some randomized, number. The customer name is Jane Smith, and the customer email is janesmith@gmail.com. So within that row, you'll see, this is your ID, Jane Smith, and janesmith@gmail.com is the row or record. So what are some of the basic SQL concepts we're going to go over today? I wanted to lay it out for you ahead of time so that you can see what we're going to go through, and also have a definition page, right? Because sometimes when you go through these concepts, and even when you're familiar with them, we kind of forget, what's the definition? I just know how it works. Or if you have never seen this before, at least you have something to go back to and refer to. Like when you say group by, what does that even mean? And so we start with select from, which is choose the column from a table. Where helps you filter down the rows, because when you're working with large data sets, you want to put a condition in and filter down what rows you need. Group by groups the rows. Having allows you to filter those group rows. Order by, which you'll find, or at least I use quite often, is sorting rows. Limit helps you restrict the number of rows you're returning. And I'll walk through this more in detail later, but great use of limit, especially when you're first exploring a large data set and you don't know what you're looking at. You don't have to pull everything, nor should you. Limit gives you a good sample of what the data is showing you, or what the data table contains. And last but not least, left join. Left join brings in additional tables for more data points. So when you're querying, you're often starting out with one data table. And as you progress very quickly, because you're all very intelligent, you'll find that you want additional data points that your current data table doesn't have. And there are many different types of joins out there. And join is simply, how do I append and add more information to my existing table? You'll find that left join is the most commonly used table. Left join is the most commonly used join amongst all the joins that you are going to learn about. So it's a quick breeze through of what you'll expect to see. And of course, what is SQL training without some hands-on training? Now, you can feel free to either set up this environment now, or I've put it here so that I know sometimes learning on the fly is really hard to look back and forth and follow. And so what I'll do is I'll show you and talk through the SQL environment and editor and the data sets. And if you'd like to follow along, fantastic. And if not, no worries. As Chloe and Stephen mentioned, this is recorded. So sometimes the best way to practice is to come back, rewind, replay. What did she say again? What was that website that I had to go to? And that's the best way to get yourself started. And so before I jump out of presentation mode, I wanted to share, a couple of SQL environments or editors for you to consider as you're getting started. And if this is the first time you're hearing SQL editor or SQL environment, I wanted to break it down for you. It just means somewhere to write SQL. Like, you're going to learn this language. Where am I even going to start writing this thing, right? And I've listed out 3. There are many other ones out there, but SQLite, especially the one that I'm going to show you today or using, in my examples, is really easy, quick and easy, because it's browser-based. You don't have to download it, and you don't have to configure it, which I often find beginners can get stuck in the configuration of their settings, and then you give up because you can't even get to the environment where you start writing select from. So SQLite is really easy because once you jump on, you can get going once you upload a data set. They even have a demo data set in there. But 2 other popular ones are MySQL and Postgres. You have plenty of videos out there that show you how to set up those environments. And they're great because everyone recognizes them. When I say everyone, it may be the hiring manager for the job that you're looking at. They'll recognize, like, oh, you have experience with Postgres. Great. Okay, this is translatable. SQLite, if you know how to write SQL, translatable, right? And then you got to have data to work with. So what kind of data sets can you find? Kaggle is a very, very popular one. Plenty of data sets on Kaggle for you to play with. And then this one is specific to today's data set or practice data set. But New York City actually has an open data initiative that started in 2012, and it's free public data that's published by the city and its partners for use and training. And you can find anything from the number of trees on the street to the number of dogs registered in New York. They also have online training courses for anyone interested in checking it out. So it's great that they offer this free service. And with that, I'm actually going to show you the SQL environment and the data set so that I'm not talking at you, but actually showing you where to go if you decide to come back to use this as practice. So hang on one second. So for everyone that I was just telling you about SQLite, SQLite is very easy. You literally put in this URL, SQLiteonline.com, and instantly you have a SQL editor in front of you, right? And the reason I picked this was, just to reiterate, was that I didn't want you to have something where you had to set up connections and configure and get stuck on that, downloading something to your laptop, and instead give you something that's browser-based, quick and easy. Let me get on this URL. Let me even get familiar and feel out like what this interface looks like. And so what you'll find here is that you can actually connect to PostgreSQL if you have something there already. For people like myself who were just starting out with a demo for you, when you jump into SQLite, ignore this because I added this myself, but this is all you'll have. You'll have SQLite, you'll have a demo data set, it'll have an ID, name, etc. But today, what I wanted to show you was you can actually work with some fun data, which is the New York City open data set that I told you about. So New York City has an open data website. And what I found was you can actually look up New York City dogs licensing. Fun fact, I have a dog. I live in New York City, so my dog is within this data set. And that's what drew me to this data set. Because why not make data fun versus dry and boring about org? Let's make it about dogs. And so here you can export this data and download it as CSV. API endpoints is a little bit more for the folks who are in data eng or data ops. Perhaps you're more familiar with this, but starting out, this data set is just a little over 700,000 rows. So you could definitely put that in a CSV, and that's what I did. And then within SQLite, you have the ability to import the file. So you can go ahead and import the file from the file that you just downloaded, which is the New York City dog licensing data set, which I already did. One thing to note when you're importing the data, make sure that there is a option to choose what the header is. when you let it just auto pick the header, what ends up happening is that the actual header, so the field names, become a row. So you want to make sure that when you select it, you make sure that you pick that the first row is actually the field name that you want, or else it'll get you generic column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And that's actually you'll find across many databases when you're uploading data, especially CSV. It just doesn't know until you tell it in advance, like, hey, the header is actually the column name. Otherwise, it will just default to column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so here, the reason why you actually see New York City dogs, and you don't have to do this. Hi, David. Oh, wait, no, never mind. I thought he had a question. Was you can actually create a SQLite database here, and that's what I did. So when I did that, I just put in a SQL database name, you hit check, and the next thing you know, I had put in New York City dogs DB. So you can actually, this is bad naming convention, but I'm just gonna put it here just to show you how that happens. Quick and easy, you can actually now see it's New York City dogs 2 DB. And I wanted to have a clean view for you, and that's the reason I put it there. But here, once you import New York City dog licensing, you'll actually see a table, right? So we were talking about a database. So the database here is New York City dogs DB, which stands for database. And the table that we've uploaded, or you will upload, is New York City dog licensing. And the reason I was telling you about the column names is now when you drop down, you'll see that the New York City dog licensing data set actually has the name, the gender, birth year, breed name, zip code, license, when it was issued, when it's going to expire, which I should actually check my own because I need to renew before mine expires, and extract date. So when did they extract that data from their database? When data freshness matters to you. And we're going to ignore New York City zip code for now and pretend it's not there because I had put it in there in advance for you. So I just want to show you this before we jump back into all the concepts that I was telling you about. What I'm jealous about is that when I started working with data and SQL, now it's like almost a decade ago plus, I didn't have this. Like you could see, I just typed S, and SQL editors are starting to, this is becoming the basis of their product, where they give you something where you could start to select what your options are. Back then, you had to write out select, but now you actually see you can even just have it autocomplete select, which is wonderful. And so, especially for those of you who are learning or brushing up, this is fantastic because it's such a great helper. When you're learning a new language, including a foreign language, sometimes you don't even know what syntax or what you should conjugate, what's the conjugation of this or translation of something. And so now with autocomplete or ways to see what are my options, it's a lot easier to get started. But I just wanted to quickly show you that if you get in here today, tomorrow, anytime, and just write select star from, and you can see that here, once I started typing N, it also gives you the option of what table you want it from. And with that, if you were to hit run, congratulations, you've run your first SQL query. If you've never run a query before, it's actually that simple, right? I think that we as a society make it seem like, oh my God, you have to learn all these things to become a coder or programmer. And I'm here to tell you that you can easily get started by select star from and your data set. The other cool thing I wanted, oh yes, Stephen.
Yeah, I almost wanted to pause on that for a second, and if it's all right with you, I wanted to maybe repeat back some of what you've shown up to this point, because you've really been able to do quite a lot for free pretty quickly here. You had to find a database to run SQL on, so you went to SQLite online. You found a data set to run your queries on, so you got that from the New York City portal, downloaded it as a file, and were able to upload it here into a table. And now that you have an interface to write SQL queries on, you're even getting some auto assistance with those queries because it's finishing the statements and adding table names and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can see why you'll see YouTube videos online saying, get started with SQL in 5 minutes, because that's what I just showed you, right? And I think sometimes the hard part is, where do I even go? What are the examples I can even use? What's the environment that I start writing SQL in? I think sometimes the hardest part is not you understanding what the SQL is or like select star from. It's how do I even get into this environment to hit run and know I did it successfully? So, you know, if nothing else and you're getting started, I wanted you to have the environment, the editor, and a data set. And just simply saying to yourself, my benchmark is that I got to select start from and I hit run and I got my data set, which I can run in front of you right now. Once you hit run, and I'll talk about limits very soon because it helps things run faster. But once you hit run and you got a data set, I would say you just did it. You just wrote SQL and got a result, because half the time it's just getting it to run and not hitting an error, right? And so that's as simple as that. So I wanted to make sure that for everyone out there listening who wants to get started, feels like they've been trying and failing, I want you to know, like, set a reachable benchmark. Don't think that you got to be this amazing coder or SQL writer, data modeler out there. You don't have to be the best. The most important thing is that you understand the data that you're actually pulling. You don't get paid for writing SQL, you get paid for understanding the data. That was something I heard from someone recently, and I thought that's exactly how you should think about it. I don't have to be the best coder, but I need to understand what the data is telling me. But first I start by writing, and then I'll tell you what it means. So with that, I'm going to flip back to the presentation because I want to go through the concepts. We were just talking about select from, and I was just saying that it's the most fundamental SQL query you could ever write. And I'll let you read this boring definition, but I wanted to explain it to you in my own words. So I just showed you here what we did live together, which was select star from the dog licensing table. And for those of you starting out, what does star even mean? Select star means give me everything from this table. So as you progress in SQL, whenever you see that asterisk or the star, right, in anything, it means everything. That's SQL's way of saying, or you communicating to SQL, give me everything. And I wanted to show you on the right-hand side a little bit more where in your day-to-day, you're not going to select everything because you're going to be more specific about the columns that you need. And in this case, I just put out an example for you of selecting the name, the gender, the birth year, and the breed. So it narrows down the columns. In real life, because this data set's pretty small, but in real life, you might have 50 columns. And so if you select star, you're going to give yourself analysis paralysis. And so remember that. Don't give yourself paralysis. Allow yourself to focus on the columns and the data points that you actually need. And that's why you'll find select star is only used, at least I use it for exploring the data and seeing what the sample of data is showing me. But after that, once I know what I need, you start to narrow down the fields that you actually want to focus on. And the other thing I wanted to note for all of you is formatting and commas. So you'll notice that here, after every single field, there's a comma, except for after breed name, where you have from to identify what to do next. Imagine this. Someone just said to you, like, Mary Jane, right? And you're like, is it Mary and Jane or is it Mary Jane? I actually got this question wrong on a grammar test a long time ago. But the reason why I made this point is because SQL, like, it will read it as animal name, animal gender as one field if you don't put a comma next to it, which then it will say back to you there's an error because there's no field called animal name, animal gender combined, right? And so think of it in this way: you're telling it these are separate fields that I want, and when it gets to from, it understands like this is the end. So therefore, you don't need that comma on the very last fields. It's a common mistake that you'll find when you're first starting out. When you run your query, you'll get an error, and it's because you forgot commas. It feels silly, but it's one of the first things I check for. I'm like, did I miss a comma somewhere, right? The other thing you'll notice is formatting, right? Like, how come you didn't just write animal name, comma, animal gender all in one string? I'll say people have their personal preferences out there. I've seen plenty of SQL queries and code out there where it's their own preference. That's how they write, and that's how they quickly get through something. But I would say that formatting, like the way that you're seeing it today, it's important for readability. Not just for you to come back to your code and be able to fix an error or adjust for future needs, but to someone else you're working with. So, you know, I always adopt the philosophy of be kind and make sure that when someone else jumps into your code, they can easily quickly glance at it and read it and see if you add a new data field, is it in your code or not, versus having to scan a whole paragraph for what is or is not included. And keeping it clean just allows everyone to have a happier time editing and reviewing. The next concept was around where. Where is for filtering. And I thought this image was a great way to define what does where, what does where mean, which is how do you filter down the data. And it's important because it's, as you get into bigger data sets, it helps you with efficiency and of course the accuracy of what you produce. So here's where, without jumping back and forth in SQLite, but I wanted to show you an example where, like how to use where. This data set has over 700,000 rows, as you saw when we jumped in and looked at the data set with New York City Open Data. And so you'll want to narrow the data set down to perhaps the animal's birth year or the name or the breed. If you have a dog, you're curious how many other people named your dog the same, their dog the same name. Or perhaps you're curious about, you know, how many dogs were registered and born in a particular year. So here I showed you when does where come into play. So you do select all your columns from this table and where comes after that. It's important to know the order in which it's laid out, or else if you go hit run, if you put where before select, it won't run. It will give you an error because it's just syntax that it doesn't understand. And also think about it logically. How do you know how to filter for something before you even tell it what table to look at, right? And what columns to look at. And so you can select the birth year equals 2024 here, and it will just return the data set for all animals born in 2024. I wanted to show you another example where, let's say I wanted to make the data set a little bit bigger. So I looked for animal birth year that was in the last 10 years. And so I put greater than 2014. And go back to your grade school math days or, junior high math days where greater than does not include 2014. So greater than will actually give you 2015 and onward. And so if you want 2014, you can imagine you'll either do greater than 2013 or greater than and equals to. And here I wanted to show you an example of what about multiple conditions, right? So what if I want every animal or dog born in the last 10 years and they were male, because my dog happens to be male. And so I put, you can use your animal gender equals M. And make sure that another error that pops up is that when you put in your condition, if I wrote male, it won't recognize it because you can see here in your data set, male is identified as M, right? So it will either return nothing or give you an error depending on the database you're working with and the syntax. But here it's important to note, you have to get the condition right by looking at the data and sample set. You can also use or. I won't go into too much more detail due to time, but there are ways to think about, where filters with and or conditions equals in. And so, You can start with this as practice, and then you'll start to quickly realize, wait a minute, I have more conditions I want to filter for. It's fun. Order by and limit. So order by, and I'll skip to the example with our dog data set. Order by allows you to sort the columns. So you can imagine if you've ever worked with Excel or just looking at a data sheet or even a chart, you want to look at things ascending or descending, right? It just allows you to see what's the highest, what's the lowest, and so when you think about order, it's either going to alphabetize it or put it in numeric order. And the other thing I wanted to note was order comes after where. So as you're writing your SQL statement, order is coming in after where. And if you don't specify descending, it will default to ascending. So that's just a tip for anyone who's writing SQL. If you're writing it and you forget to put, identify it, it just defaults to ascending. Limit. So I mentioned limit real quick before, but when you're exploring data, especially when you're jumping into data sets for the first time, and let's say you're doing select star from a table, make sure you put a limit in there. It could be 10, 25, 50 to see the data sample set. And it really comes into play when, we have 700,000 rows. The query runs pretty quickly, as you saw earlier. But if that sample set was 700 million rows, I promise you're going to sit around for a bit, depending on your database's performance and what other queries you've got, but it will take you some time. So limit allows you speed to quickly see a bit of your data set. And the other thing is costs. You will realize that when you're working at a company or if you're paying for your database, there's a cost to running your query. And so you can imagine the longer it's running, it's actually just dollar signs after dollar signs that are coming in. And you don't want to be the analyst coming in on your first or second week and running something. And suddenly it's racked up a bill of $200,000 because you just didn't realize, wait, I select star from the table and it was running for 12 hours because you didn't know how much data you were trying to retrieve. So limit protects you from those instances, especially when you're exploring data. Group by. So group by allows you to summarize and analyze your data. It allows you to aggregate data efficiently. So you can imagine when you're trying to glean insight from your data, you want to start grouping and summarizing data. You don't want to just keep scrolling through your data set. And in this example, I'm showing you group by with count because group by is often used with aggregation functions like count, sum, max, etc. So you can quickly get to an answer. And in this case, what I did was I wanted to select the breed name and then I'm adding count star. So if you remember earlier, I said count star, star means everything. So you're counting all the rows, right, that are associated with this breed name. And you might ask me, Celina, why is it not count breed name? Because you want every single unique record associated with Beagle, right? If Beagle shows up, and here you see Beagle shows up over 4,000 times, if you count Beagle, then it's just going to count the Beagle, like, hey, how many times does Beagle show up? And so you want to count the number of records that are associated with Beagle, every single dog that identifies as Beagle. And so here you could see in the last 10 years, there were over 4,000 Beagles registered in New York City. Having. So having can get confusing. So don't be afraid if you're like, hey, by the end of this, I'm not getting having. It can take some time, but having is allowing you to filter after you've grouped by. So the clearest way to think about having is when you want to filter down the condition of the aggregation that you just put in, right? So in this case, You'll see here I put in group by breed name having count greater than 1,000, because remember analysis paralysis, you want to exclude insignificant data points. Like this is the fastest way for you to get to business impact or business answer. You don't want to look through all these records of, you know, 1 or 2 of a particular breed. You want to look at significant data. So you want to exclude the data points that are outliers and focus on what's significant. Remember to reduce analysis paralysis for yourself. And so now you can see when you're looking at the data set, you're like, okay, American Bully, Pit Bull mix, Australian Cattle Dog. But what is something you notice about the count, right? It's all over the place. And so what is something that you can add to the query to help you figure out a question that might be posed to you of what's the most popular breed in New York City in the last 10 years? And if you said order by, then you win, because once you add in order by, the count and descending for most popular, remember, so you want the highest amount. Now you can quickly see that the most popular registered breed in New York City in the last 10 years is a Yorkshire Terrier. So if you see a Yorkshire Terrier when you're visiting New York City or live here, just know in the last 10 years, it's the most popular dog to be registered in New York City. So it's very likely you're going to come across one. Fun fact, my dog is a rescue dog, so we actually put him under unknown. So my dog is listed under unknown, which is the second highest breed name, if you will, to show up. I wanted to put this here. I know we're a little short on time, but I wanted to give you a slide to reference back to when it comes to where versus having, because even for folks who've had experience with writing SQL, they could get tripped up on where versus having, right? And so I wanted to leave you with the slide here that you can reference back to know, when do I use where versus having? Just remember that where can be before and used without group by. You don't need the aggregation. You can actually say where this year and this animal name. My dog's name's Wrigley, so that's why I used him as an example here. Versus having is associated with group by. It's an aggregation, it's a number-based filter, right? Where can be number-based, can be name-based, can be text-based, etc. And last but not least, joins. You're going to feel like we're racing through this, but I really wanted you to focus on the fact that the concept of join is combining tables, because now that you've played with the animal data set, there's probably more information you want to know. In everyday life, as you're working as, in a company, you might find tables with just IDs. And so if it says customer ID, but you need to find their name, you're going to have to bring in another table to find their name that's associated with their ID. And if you forget everything else, I want you to remember that the most common join you're going to find yourself using, and you're going to find others using, and for efficiency purposes, etc., is left join. And I hope this diagram helps you see what each join represents. And I'll focus on left join. So left join means that left table is your existing table. So this dog data set that we're working with. You have all the rows from this dog data set, and you just want to bring in a couple of pieces of information. So when I say a couple of pieces of information, it's a couple of columns from another table that would help you glean more information about your existing table. And that's why you see in this Venn diagram, it's not taking the whole right table, it's taking pieces of the right table that overlap or match some of the left table. And you rarely see right join. You might find inner join where you just want the data that matches exactly between these two tables, and then you'll find full join out there too. But you'll more often than not find yourself using left join. And so in our data, in the hands-on practice that you can come back to, you'll find that in the dog data set, there was zip codes. I didn't really focus on zip codes because when you look at zip codes, especially if you're not from New York, You're like, I don't even know what that means. Is it Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens? What part of New York are we talking about, right? And so a natural way to think about how do I get more information is to find a data set that tells you this zip code 10035 is equal to, is in what borough and what neighborhood. Turns out it's Manhattan and East Harlem. But the question naturally, pops up like, Celina, where do I even find this data set? Don't worry, I found it for you. It's in CAG. It's actually in the site that I had mentioned, Kaggle. Kaggle has a New York City zip code lookup data table, so you can download it as a CSV, import it to SQLite like we did with the New York City data dog licensing table. And then you'll ask, but how do I bring it together? And the magic line is after select from, you'll want to add left join because you're joining the zip code data to your dog licensing data set. And it's very important to add this on what? SQL doesn't know when you say just join these two tables, you're like, well, what am I matching for? And so think of it this way. What are the two fields that are the same in the two tables, right? And so in this case, I have zip code in my dog licensing table, and I have zip code in my zip code data table. And when I left join on zip code of dog licensing table, which I denoted as D, to my zip code file, which I denoted as Z, it brings back everything that matches to the dog licensing table, where if I find zip code 10035, I find it in my zip code file. And by the way, that means Manhattan, East Harlem, and zip code. And so I put a box around the new columns you've now brought into your data table. And I know I'm almost out of time, but I just wanted to show you why that even matters. Once you glean insight into like, why am I bringing this all together? You can answer questions like, which borough has the most registered dogs? So in this case, before I just had zip code, remember? So there's no way I could know that all these zip codes belong to Manhattan or Brooklyn. But now that I've brought in the table, I can now aggregate the data with everything we've just learned. And I was able to quickly identify that across my data set, Manhattan has the most registered dogs across New York City. So over 239,000 dogs. And you can imagine, if you love this dog data set and you want to learn more about New York City dogs, you're going to dig into, well, by what neighborhood, by what breed, if I'm walking around the Upper East Side, what kind of dogs am I going to run into? Whose dogs have the same, what's the likelihood of running into a dog with that has the same name as my dog? And that's where more data fun continues. And I know we're out of time, but I wanted to leave you with another page that you can snapshot or keep for yourself. You just today quickly learned some of the beginners SQL concepts. I wanted to leave you with what's next, right? What is considered intermediate that is important for me as I progress in my career in the world of any sort of data analysis and want to become more advanced in SQL. And so I'm going to leave you with this list since we're out of time to go through each one of them. And last but not least, Celina, I want more practice, more YouTube videos. I narrowed it down to the top 3 that I've seen across the internet, which is these YouTube videos and these sites where you can continue practicing and learning. And hopefully one day I'm going to be working for you. So thanks for listening. Thanks for staying 2 minutes over, and you can find me on LinkedIn. And back to you, Stephen or Chloe.
Thank you guys so much. We have a question from Erwin and then a question from Sai. So do you have time to answer 2 questions? Or?
Yes, I do. All right, I'm just going through the questions. Are those leading commas? Oh, Amy, I love this. I love this question. I almost put it in and I'm like, but I don't want to confuse you all for now. But leading versus, so for everybody else, when Amy asks, are those leading commas? Remember in the example, we talked about the fields, like here's animal name and the breed name, and you got to put like a comma in between so it recognizes it. Well, the data world likes to debate where we put the comma, not to make things more complicated, but again, comes back to preference, right? And what people like to do when they're writing SQL. And so some people will put the comma after they write the field name, and some people will actually put the comma before the field name. And I have my preferences, Amy, and someone might come and yell at me, but I'll explain my preference. I actually prefer leading commas because when you've done enough editing, I know, but when I'm writing when I know that I have a bunch of people reviewing, I'm like, all right, what's your preference? How do you understand this language better? But when you've done enough SQL cleanup and you're going through and editing fields and changing columns, when you need to delete a field, you actually find that what I find myself caught up in is that if my commas are, if I have commas placed in a certain way and I'm deleting that field, I'll forget to remove the comma that I should have removed from the line before, versus if it was a leading comma in my existing field, as I'm deleting that line, you tend to take your cursor and just delete the whole thing, right? Or comment it out with dashes. And so I think it's more of a preference and a who else is looking at this code, to answer your question. But I think my answer is because when you've gone through enough pain, you're like, what's more efficient? Great question.
Awesome.
And and Steven says he's loyal to trailing commas. And there was another question. Oh, Sai, are there any assignments? No, just because I know this is like a one-time session, but what I would love, Sai, is that if you can take the presentation today, and if you were to look at, SQLite and the data sets that you saw and go through the examples yourself, because obviously an hour is not enough time to go through and download everything. I'd love to hear your thoughts because I love dogs, and so you can imagine how I stumbled upon this data set and how many questions I have. Like one of my questions why I looked up the data set was how many people name their dog Wrigley in New York City, and how unique are we in New York versus living in Chicago, which obviously in Chicago, that name is everywhere. So that would be, there's no assignment to follow up on, but I would say as you're practicing, use this as a guide, check out those videos I mentioned, and see what style works for you, because the way that I explained it might not work for everybody, but I wanted to explain it in a way that worked for everyone. I can't tell you how many times when I was trying to learn SQL, I'm like, can you just explain it to me in layman's terms or normal people terms instead of all these technical terms? I'm like, that's the point of a definition, is to not give me something more technical. And so that's how I thought about explaining some of these basic concepts, just in a different way.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Celina. This was really excellent.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we really started this on a high note, so thank you.
Yeah, of course. And feel free, everyone, to reach out. I know some of you are well into your data careers and some are just getting started and want to up-level your skill set. And we just want to make data fun, make data approachable. It shouldn't be an exclusive club. It should be for everybody. So hopefully everything I mentioned helped you get a little further ahead with SQL, or learned a new way to describe certain SQL concepts.
And so, yeah, and if, again, this session will be recorded and sent to your emails. So if you want to ever come back to this as you're learning SQL, you'll be able to watch it. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any other questions. I will also, on the YouTube link, I'll drop a link to Celina's LinkedIn. And yeah, so thank you guys.
And before everybody drops, I just want to give a plug for the rest of this session. This is week 1 of the Database Tycoon summer camp. So if you received this invite, you've already signed up, and you should receive the invites for all the rest of the sessions very soon. Last thing I'll say is that Database Tycoon is an agency. We are working on solving some big data problems out there for companies small and large. So if you want to chat, or if you have any data problems that you want to talk through, we're here to help. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.